I called maintenance about a leak. Instead, I got a shirtless man with a tool belt and eyes that could dismantle more than plumbing. The water had been dripping for 3 days, not the gentle patter of rain, but the insistent thunk, thunk, thunk of something structural giving way. My landlord's voicemail was full. The building super hadn't returned my calls, so when the emergency line connected me to a voice that said, "He's already on his way," I didn't ask questions. I was too tired, too broke to care about anything except stopping the water from ruining the stack of ungraded sophomore essays on my kitchen table. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I should have been in bed. Instead, I was standing in my worn Cornell sweatshirt, the one with the bleach stain on the sleeve, watching my ceiling bulge like something alive, something ready to burst. My studio apartment in Crown Heights wasn't much. Exposed brick that the listing called charming, but really just meant old. A fire escape I used as a bookshelf. Radiator heat that clanged like ghost chains every night at 2 a.m. But it was mine. The first place I'd lived alone after. I didn't let myself finish that thought. The knock came hard. 3 sharp raps that didn't ask permission. I pulled the door open, expecting middle-aged irritation and a plunger. What I got was Dante Morelli. 6'3" of controlled danger. Dark hair pushed back like he'd been running his hands through it. Tattoos scrolling up forearms dusted with drywall. Intricate designs that looked expensive. Deliberate. Nothing like the impulse ink guys got in college. He wore work boots and jeans slung low on his hips. And that was it. Just skin and ink and muscle, a toolbox in one hand and a smile that felt like a warning. He didn't ask if he could come in. He just walked past me, bringing the smell of night air and something darker, cologne maybe, or smoke. His eyes swept my apartment with the efficiency of someone trained to catalog exits, weapons, vulnerabilities. "You live here alone?" His voice was rough silk, Brooklyn accent softened by something else. Italy, maybe. Old country in his consonants. I should have lied. Every instinct screamed to lie. "Yes," I said. He tilted his head at my ceiling, then at me. Really looked at me, not the way men usually did, not the hungry inventory or the dismissive glance. He looked at me like I was a problem to solve, a puzzle with missing pieces. "This building has structural issues everywhere," he said, moving to stand directly beneath the bulge. Water dripped onto his bare shoulder. He didn't flinch. "You shouldn't be living here." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. I watched him work, efficient, precise, hands that knew exactly what they were doing. He didn't make small talk, didn't fill the silence with the nervous chatter contractors usually offered. He just fixed the pipe with tools that looked too expensive for emergency maintenance, his muscles shifting under skin as he reached into the ceiling cavity. 20 minutes. That's all it took. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stood in my kitchen, still shirtless, looking at things he had no right to notice. The bills scattered across my counter, Con Ed, phone, credit card minimum payments circled in red. The double locks on my door, the baseball bat I kept by the window, the pepper spray on my keychain hanging by the sink. "You're a teacher," he said. Not a question, a statement. "How did you—" He gestured to the essays, to the lesson plan book open on my desk, to the coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Teacher" that my students had given me last Christmas as a joke. "I make it my business to know my tenants." The word landed wrong. Tenants. Plural. Possessive. "You're not maintenance," I said slowly. His smile was brief, sharp. "No. You own the building." Among other things. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I became aware of how I looked, no bra under the sweatshirt, hair piled in a messy knot, bare feet on the cold floor. Vulnerable. Exposed. He noticed me noticing. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "But this building, it's been flagged. There are people watching it, watching the tenants. Why? Wrong people owned it before me, left debts, made promises they couldn't keep." He pulled a rag from his toolbox, wiped his hands slowly. "Sometimes the debt gets transferred. I don't have anything to do with—" "Doesn't matter. You're here, that makes you visible." I thought about the scratches on my mailbox, the way someone had tried my door handle 2 weeks ago at 3 a.m., the man I'd seen loitering across the street last Thursday, watching my window. I'd told myself I was paranoid. That leaving Ryan had made me see threats everywhere. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Or recognition. Like he saw something in me that surprised him. "I want you to be careful," he said. "Lock your doors. Vary your routine. Don't answer questions from people you don't know." He paused. "And call me directly if anything feels wrong. Not the landlord, not the service." Me? He pressed a business card into my palm. His fingers lingered, warm, calloused, deliberate. The card was heavy stock, embossed letters, no company name, just a phone number. "I don't understand," I said. "You will." He gathered his tools, pulled on a black t-shirt that had been tucked in his back pocket, became slightly less dangerous, slightly more human. But not much. At my door, he paused. His shadow cut across my threshold, dividing my world into before and after. "From now on," he said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle, something that felt like a promise and a threat wrapped together. "You call me directly. Not the landlord, not the service. Me." Then he was gone. I stood there, staring at the card, feeling like I'd just signed a contract I didn't understand. The ceiling was fixed. The leak had stopped. But something else had started. Something I couldn't name, couldn't stop. That night, I heard an engine idling outside my window, the low, expensive purr of a vehicle that cost more than my yearly salary. I pulled the curtain back just enough to see the black SUV parked directly across from my building, tinted windows reflecting streetlight. It didn't move for an hour. When I finally fell asleep, the card was still in my hand. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was my rent receipt, stamped paid in full for the next 6 months. Below it, handwritten in dark ink, "From now on, no one touches you." I called the number on the card. Once, twice, 3 times. No one answered. But the SUV was still there. I tried to return the money. That's what a rational person does when a stranger pays 6 months of rent without asking. You say no. You draw boundaries. You protect yourself from debts you can't repay and generosity that feels like a leash tightening around your throat. I called the number on the card 3 times before someone answered. Not Dante, a woman's voice, cool and professional, with the kind of efficiency that came from answering calls for powerful men who didn't have time for complications. Morelli Enterprises. The name landed in my stomach like a stone. Enterprises. Plural. Not a landlord. Something bigger. "I need to speak with Dante Morelli," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Regarding the rent payment? There's been a mistake." A pause. The soft click of keys typing. "Your name?" "Olivia Reeves. I have your information, Miss Reeves. Mr. Morelli will be in touch." The line went dead before I could respond. For 3 days, I went through the motions. Taught Lord of the Flies to 10th graders who cared more about their phones than symbolism. Graded essays on moral corruption while drinking bodega coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Came home to my studio that felt different now. Not safer, but observed. Like someone had marked it on a map with a pin that said, "This one matters." I told myself I was being paranoid. That the black SUV rotating between 2 parking spots on my block was coincidence. That the man in the wool coat standing outside Brooklyn Tech during dismissal, the same man 2 days in a row, was just someone waiting for a student. But I'd learned to trust my instincts. Ryan had taught me that in the worst way possible. On the 3rd day, I confronted him. The man in the wool coat was reading a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, like this was 1995, leaning against a parking meter as students streamed past him toward the subway. I walked right up to him, heart hammering, pepper spray palmed in my coat pocket. "Can I help you with something?" He looked up slowly. Mid-40s, maybe. Scarred knuckles, eyes that had seen things I didn't want to imagine. But when he smiled, it was almost kind. "Just a precaution, miss." Precaution for what? Mr. Morelli's orders. The way he said it, matter of fact, immovable, made my chest tighten. I didn't ask for protection. "No, miss. But you need it." He folded his newspaper with careful precision, nodded once like we'd reached an understanding I hadn't agreed to, and walked away. 2 blocks down, I saw him get into a dark sedan that pulled smoothly into traffic. I stood there on the sidewalk, students jostling past me, and realized I wasn't angry. I was terrified, because needing protection meant I was in danger. And danger had found me before, wearing a charming smile and telling me he loved me right up until the moment I found the cameras. That night, Dante came back, not a knock this time. A text from the unknown number. I'm downstairs. I should have ignored it. Should have turned off my phone and pretended I didn't see the message. Instead, I grabbed my keys and went down, because some part of me, the part that had been listening for that SUV engine every night, needed to understand what game I'd been pulled into. He was leaning against a black Mercedes this time, not the SUV. Different car, same energy, expensive, controlled, dangerous. He'd traded the work clothes for tailored charcoal, a dark shirt open at the collar, no tie. He looked like money, the kind of money that didn't ask permission. In his hand was a bag from Sal's, the Italian bakery on Court Street that I'd walked past 100 times but never entered because their cannoli cost more than my lunch budget. You've been avoiding me? He said. You paid my rent? I did. Without asking? Yes. No apology, no explanation, just acknowledgement. Like we were discussing weather instead of boundaries crossed and autonomy stolen. I don't want it, I said. He pushed off the car, moved closer. Not threatening. Careful, like approaching something wounded. But you need it. That's not the point. Then what is? I gestured helplessly at everything. The car, the man following me, the envelope under my door, the feeling of being watched and cataloged and managed. I don't know you. I don't know what you want. And I don't do debts I can't repay. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Recognition, maybe? Like I'd said something that mattered. Come upstairs, he said. Let me explain. Every instinct screamed no. But he'd already paid my rent. Already stationed guards. Already decided I mattered for reasons I didn't understand. Walking away wouldn't change that. So I led him up to my studio, hyper-aware of the narrow stairs, the flickering hallway light, the thin walls that meant my neighbors would hear every word. Inside, he set the bakery bag on my counter like an offering, sfogliatelle and cannoli and something else wrapped in wax paper. He didn't sit, just leaned against my fridge, arms crossed, filling my small space with his presence. You asked what I want, he said. I want you alive. The bluntness of it stopped my breath. This building, he continued, was owned by a man named Vincent Castellano. He ran it as a front for money laundering. When the feds closed in, he sold it quickly. To me. But his people don't know that yet. Or they do, and they're testing boundaries. What does that have to do with me? You're visible, predictable, a teacher who keeps the same schedule, walks the same route, lives alone in a ground floor unit with windows facing the street. His voice was gentle but implacable. You're the kind of target they use to send messages. My hands were shaking. I pressed them against the counter. What kind of messages? The kind that remind people like me that no one is untouchable, that even the things we protect can be taken away. The things we protect, like I was an asset, a possession, something to be managed and controlled. I didn't ask to be protected, I said again, but the words sounded weak even to me. No, but you're in the crossfire anyway. I wanted to call him paranoid, wanted to believe this was manipulation, some elaborate scheme. But I remembered the scratches on my mailbox, the door handle turning at 3 a.m., the man watching my window. How long? I asked. How long have you been watching me? Since I bought the building. 4 months. 4 months. While I'd taught classes and graded papers and convinced myself I was safe, he'd been cataloging my vulnerabilities. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have run. Found another apartment? Moved somewhere I couldn't protect you. He paused, jaw tight. And they would have followed. The certainty in his voice made my stomach drop. How do you know? He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, turned it toward me. A photograph, grainy, clearly surveillance footage, showed a man with a scar along his jaw standing outside my building. Different angle, different time, but unmistakably watching my window. Recognize him? I shook my head. His name is Marco Castellano, Vincent's nephew. He's been circling this block for 2 weeks. Another swipe, another photo, the same man sitting in a coffee shop across from Brooklyn Tech. He knows where you work, where you shop, your routine. The room tilted. I gripped the counter harder. Why me? My voice came out small. There are other tenants, other people in this building. Because you're alone. No family visits. No boyfriend's car parked outside. No one who'd notice immediately if you disappeared. His eyes met mine, dark and unflinching. You're vulnerable, Olivia? And vulnerable is exactly what they look for. Hearing my name in his mouth felt intimate, wrong, like he'd crossed another boundary I hadn't known existed. I can make this go away, he said, softer now. I have resources, connections, people who owe me favors, but you have to let me. Let you what? Control my life. Tell me where I can go, who I can see. Keep you safe until the threat is neutralized. And then what? Then you go back to your life. Free. Clear, like none of this happened. It sounded simple, reasonable, but I'd heard promises before from a man who said he loved me, who said he just wanted to help, who slowly stripped away my autonomy until I didn't recognize myself anymore. I need to think, I said. Dante nodded slowly, started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. I know what you're thinking, he said. That this is control, that I'm trying to trap you. Maybe I am. Not the way you think, but in ways I don't fully understand yet. His honesty was more disarming than any lie. But I'm not him. Whoever hurt you before made you put double locks on your doors and keep a bat by the window. I'm not him. How do you know someone hurt me? Because I recognize the signs. And because... He stopped himself, jaw working like he was swallowing words that cost something to keep inside. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his entire expression hardened, every soft edge turning to stone. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, fear. We're out of time, he said. What? He turned the phone toward me again. A text message from an unknown number, just 4 words and a photo. Tell Morelli we're watching. The photo was of me, taken today. Walking out of Brooklyn Tech with my canvas bag over my shoulder. Coffee in hand, completely unaware. Taken 2 hours ago. You were chosen as a message, Dante said, his voice deadly quiet. And they're not the forgiving type. He took me that night. Not a request, not a negotiation. Just a hand on my arm and words that left no room for argument. Pack a bag, enough for 3 days. I stared at him, at the photo still glowing on his phone screen. Me, unaware and exposed, captured like prey in a hunter's scope. I can't just leave. I have classes tomorrow. Lesson plans. My students will have a substitute. Already on his phone, speaking rapid Italian to someone who clearly didn't question his orders. The language transformed him, sharper consonants, rougher edges, like he'd shed a carefully maintained disguise. Marco will call your principal. Family emergency. You'll be back by Monday. You can't just... He looked at me, then, really looked, and I saw past the control to something rawer underneath. They photographed you 2 hours ago, Olivia. 2 hours. That means they've escalated from surveillance to active intimidation. Next step is contact. After that, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. My hands were shaking again. I hated that they were shaking. Hated the fear crawling up my spine. Hated that he was right. Where are we going? Somewhere they can't reach you. Within the hour, I was in the back of his Mercedes with a hastily packed duffel, watching Brooklyn blur past the tinted windows. Dante sat beside me, one hand on his phone coordinating logistics I couldn't fully hear, the other resting on the seat between us, close enough to feel the heat of his skin but not touching. The driver never looked back, never spoke, just navigated through streets that grew progressively darker, more industrial. We pulled up to a warehouse near Red Hook, the kind of place that looked abandoned until you noticed the cameras mounted at careful angles, the men in expensive coats smoking by reinforced steel doors, the way shadows moved with purpose in the loading dock. This was his world, the one he'd been keeping me from seeing. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over concrete floors. The space had been converted into something between a command center and a bunker, security monitors covering one wall, a conference table strewn with documents and photographs, expensive leather chairs that belonged in a boardroom, not a warehouse. Men deferred to Dante with a respect that bordered on fear. Not the nervous deference people showed bosses they resented, but something deeper. Loyalty earned through action, through proving he was the kind of man who protected his people and destroyed his enemies with equal precision. "Wait here," he said, guiding me to a chair in the corner. "Don't touch anything." I watched him transform. The man who'd fixed my leak, who'd brought me pastries, who'd spoken softly about keeping me safe, he became someone else entirely. Commanding, ruthless. A general reviewing intelligence before battle. Marco, the same man who'd followed me, spread photographs across the conference table. 3 faces I didn't recognize. Locations mapped with red string like something from a crime show made horrifyingly real. "These people," Dante said, and his voice carried across the warehouse with absolute authority, "wanted leverage against me. They found out I bought the building on St. Mark's. They ran background checks on every tenant. And they found her." He pointed to a photograph I couldn't see from my chair. I stood. Crossed the concrete floor on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The photograph was of me, not from today, from weeks ago, leaving my apartment in my weekend clothes, coffee in hand, unaware. But it wasn't the only one. There were dozens. Me at the grocery store, me walking to the subway, me through my own window, grading papers at my kitchen table. The violation hit like a physical blow. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tasting bile. "How long?" I whispered. "At least 3 weeks. Maybe longer." Dante's voice was carefully controlled, but I heard the rage underneath. "They've been building a profile. Learning your patterns. Waiting for the right moment." "For what?" The youngest man at the table, early 20s, nervous energy, looked at Dante for permission before speaking. "To take you. Use you as leverage. Send pieces back until he agrees to their terms." The room spun. Pieces. Like I was meat. Like I was nothing. Dante dismissed everyone with a gesture. They filed out quickly, quietly, leaving us alone in the fluorescent buzz. He stood beside me in the sudden silence, not touching but close enough that I could feel his presence like gravity pulling me toward something inevitable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like the words cost him something. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated they'd move this quickly. I looked at the photographs, my life reduced to surveillance images, my autonomy stolen by men I'd never met who saw me as nothing more than a tool. "Why me?" My voice cracked. "You said I was vulnerable, but there has to be more. You don't station guards and pay rent and orchestrate all this for just any tenant." His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Because the first time I saw you," he said quietly, "you were standing in your doorway at 3 a.m. with a bat in your hands and terror in your eyes, checking the hallway because someone had tried your door. And you didn't call the police, didn't call anyone, just stood there alone, trying to protect yourself from threats you couldn't name." The memory hit me like cold water. That night, 2 months ago, the handle turning slowly, testing the locks. My heart hammering so hard I thought I'd be sick. "I was doing a final walkthrough before closing the sale," Dante continued, checking the building at odd hours, making sure I knew what I was buying. "And I saw you, this woman who should have been safe in her own home, reduced to standing guard with a baseball bat because no one else would." Something in his voice made my chest ache. "I ran your name. Found out about the ex-boyfriend. The restraining order that expired 6 months ago. The fact that you'd moved 3 times in 2 years. Always alone. Always looking over your shoulder." He finally looked at me, and his eyes held something I didn't expect. Recognition. "I know what it's like to live like that. Always waiting for the threat you can't see but know is coming." "So this is pity?" The word came out bitter. "No, this is..." He stopped. Started again. "I don't let myself care about people. It's a liability in my world. Caring makes you vulnerable. Makes you make mistakes." His hand lifted, almost touched my face, then fell back to his side. "But watching you teach yourself to be invisible, to take up less space, to apologize for existing, I couldn't look away. The honesty disarmed me more than any lie could have." "They're using me to hurt you," I said. "Yes. So letting me go would solve the problem. Would it?" He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "They know your face now, your routine, where you're vulnerable. Even if I walk away, they won't. You've been marked. And in this world, That mark doesn't wash off. Before I could respond, Marco burst back in. Phone extended toward Dante. On the screen was a live video feed. My classroom at Brooklyn Tech, empty except for my desk. And on that desk, pinned through a photograph of me with a knife, was a message scrawled in red across my whiteboard. Tell Morelli we're just getting started. We drove to Tribeca in silence thick enough to choke on. Dante's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a converted industrial building. The kind of place that whispered old money, even though I knew his wealth was newer, harder earned, built on foundations I was only beginning to understand. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a kingdom he'd conquered block by block, deal by deal, threat by calculated threat. I should have been afraid. Instead, I was furious. You dragged me into this. The words came out flat, drained of the anger that had been building in my chest during the entire drive. I stood in his living room, all exposed brick and leather furniture and art that probably cost more than my yearly salary, and felt the weight of everything I'd lost in the span of hours. My safety, my autonomy, my illusion that leaving Ryan meant I'd escaped being someone's target. Dante poured 2 glasses of something amber from a crystal decanter. Expensive scotch, probably. The kind of casual luxury that marked the distance between his world and mine. I did, he said simply, handing me a glass I didn't want. And now I'm getting you out. By keeping me here, by controlling where I go, who I see. I set the glass down hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. This isn't protection. It's a different kind of prison. Something flickered across his face. Not anger, but something more complicated. He loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and I saw the tattoos extended further than I'd realized. Intricate designs that told stories in ink. Roman numerals, coordinates, names, and elegant script. And then let me explain the rules, he said, so you understand exactly what kind of prison this is. He counted them on his fingers like a businessman outlining contract terms. Except the stakes were my life. 1. You stay under my protection until the threat is neutralized. That means you don't leave this building without Marco or one of my men. You don't contact anyone, not friends, not colleagues, without clearing it through my security first. Every communication is monitored. Every movement is tracked. My hands clenched into fists. 2. You follow my instructions without question. If I tell you to move, you move. If I tell you to hide, you hide. Your survival depends on trusting that I know this world better than you do. And 3, my voice came out sharp as broken glass. 3, you don't lie to me about anything. Your past, your fears, what you're thinking when you look at me like I'm the enemy. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried. Because I can't protect you from threats I don't understand. And I can't fight enemies I can't see. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. What do I get? I finally asked. Besides my life, which you keep reminding me you're saving. Freedom. Real freedom. Once this is over. My word that no one will ever use you as leverage again. That you can go back to teaching Lord of the Flies to teenagers who don't appreciate it and living in that studio with the rattling radiator. That you can be invisible again, if that's what you want. The specificity of it, Lord of the Flies, the radiator, reminded me how much he'd observed, how thoroughly he'd cataloged my life before I even knew his name. And if I don't agree to your rules, then you walk out that door right now, and I can't help you. The Castellanos will find you within 48 hours. Maybe less. His voice dropped, became almost gentle. And what they do to send messages isn't quick or clean or merciful. I wanted to call him a manipulator, a controller. Another man who wanted to strip away my choices and call it love or protection or duty. But I'd seen the photographs, seen the knife through my picture, seen evidence of men who saw me as nothing more than a message written in blood. I have a rule, too, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Dante raised an eyebrow. Waiting. You don't lie to me. Not once. Not to protect me or spare my feelings or because you think I can't handle the truth. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. The second you lie about who you are, what you do, what kind of danger I'm really in, I walk. Consequences be damned. For a long moment, he just looked at me. Then, slowly, he extended his hand, Deal. His palm was warm, calloused, marked with old scars. I shook once, firmly, feeling like I'd just negotiated a treaty in a war I didn't fully understand. He showed me the spare room. Too luxurious with its king bed and ensuite bathroom and windows that overlooked the Hudson, too far from my real life. But as I stood there, Dante lingering in the doorway, something shifted between us. "Why did you really buy that building?" I asked. His jaw worked. "My sister used to live in Crown Heights. Different building, years ago. He stopped, the words catching somewhere painful. "She died because I wasn't careful about protecting the people in my life, because I thought keeping them at a distance meant keeping them safe." He pulled a photograph from his wallet, worn at the edges from being carried. A young woman with his same dark eyes and sharp cheekbones, laughing at the camera with unguarded joy. "Sophia," he said softly. She was a teacher too, high school English. She loved Fitzgerald and claimed everyone misread Gatsby. A ghost of a smile. "She would have liked you." The past tense hit me like a weight. What happened? She was collateral damage in a war that had nothing to do with her. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong brother. He tucked the photo away carefully. "I won't make that mistake again." It wasn't an apology, but it was an explanation, maybe the only one he knew how to give. That night, I lay in the too-soft bed, staring at unfamiliar shadows, and realized protection and control were sometimes the same thing. That safety came with prices I was only beginning to calculate. That Dante Morelli was dangerous not because he wanted to hurt me, but because some part of me was starting to trust him. And trust, I'd learned the hard way, was the most dangerous thing of all. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Dante was gone, but there was a manila folder on the kitchen counter with my name written in his precise handwriting. Inside, surveillance reports, transaction records, wire transfers, and a photograph that made my blood turn to ice. Ryan, my ex-boyfriend, standing with the scarred man from the surveillance photos, Marco Castellano, outside a bar in Williamsburg. The timestamp read 3 months ago, before the lease renewal, before the threats, before everything. Below it, a note in Dante's hand. "The enemy has been closer than you thought." The photograph wouldn't stay flat. My hands kept shaking, making Ryan's face blur and sharpen, like my brain was trying to reject what my eyes already knew. 3 months ago, before the threats, before Dante, before I'd convinced myself that changing my locks and my phone number meant I was finally free. The flashback hit in fragments, the way trauma always does. Never linear, never merciful. Ryan's smile at the faculty mixer 2 years ago. Charming. Attentive. The kind of man who remembered your coffee order and asked about your mother's health. Who said, "I just want to take care of you," like it was romance instead of warning. The gradual isolation. Your friends don't really understand you. Why do you need to go out when we have each other? I'm just worried about you walking home alone. The questions that felt too specific. Where do you keep your spare key? What time does your landlord come by? Do you always grade papers by the window? The night I found the camera hidden in the smoke detector, the second one behind the bathroom mirror. His face when I confronted him, not shame, but annoyance that I'd discovered them. "You're overreacting. I just wanted to keep you safe." I pressed my palms against the cool marble of Dante's kitchen counter, trying to ground myself in the present. But the file kept pulling me back. Bank statements showing Ryan depositing cash. Lots of cash. Amounts that didn't match his adjunct professor salary. Transaction dates that aligned with, I checked the surveillance reports, dates when men had been spotted watching my building. He'd been feeding them information, my schedule, my habits, my vulnerabilities. I'd given him everything, and he'd sold me like I was inventory. The penthouse door opened. Dante, carrying breakfast from somewhere that smelled like real food instead of grief. He took one look at me, at the papers scattered across his counter, at whatever my face was doing, and set the bags down carefully. "How long have you known?" My voice came out steady, colder than I felt. 2 days. I wanted to verify before. 2 days? I laughed, and it sounded broken. "You've known for 2 days that my ex-boyfriend has been working with the people trying to kill me, and you didn't think to mention it. I was protecting you." "From what? The truth?" I shoved the photograph toward him. "This is who I loved, who I let into my life. My bed. My home. This is who I trusted enough to give a key to. My throat tightened. I did this. I brought this on myself. Dante moved around the counter, but I stepped back. If he touched me right now, I'd shatter. You didn't do this, he said firmly. He did. They did. You survived something most people wouldn't have had the strength to leave. I should have known, should have seen. The words caught. There were signs. So many signs. The way he isolated me, controlled me, asked questions that felt wrong, but I ignored because I wanted to believe someone could love me without hurting me, without using me, without seeing me as something to break. I couldn't finish the sentence. Dante gave me space, but his presence filled the kitchen, solid, certain, waiting. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. When Sophia died, he said quietly, I spent months replaying every conversation. Every moment I could have warned her, protected her, stopped her from being in that place at that time. I convinced myself it was my fault, that loving me had killed her. I looked up, met his eyes. It took years to understand that the guilt, the responsibility we take for other people's violence, it's a cage we build ourselves. We'd rather believe we had control, even if it means blaming ourselves, than accept that sometimes evil just finds us. He paused. Ryan didn't target you because you left a door open. He targeted you because predators sense vulnerability and exploit it. That's on him, not you. The words settled in my chest like stones, heavy but grounding. What do we do now? I asked. Now we use what he gave them against them. Dante pulled out his phone, began typing. Ryan's sloppy, desperate. He's gambling away money faster than the Castellanos are paying him. That makes him useful. Useful how? He thinks you're still an easy target, that you don't know about his involvement. We let him keep thinking that. Dante looked at me, and I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the chess player seeing moves ahead. We draw him out, get him to expose his handlers, and we dismantle this from the inside. My stomach clenched. You want me to see him? I want you to bait the trap, but only if you're willing. His voice softened. I won't force you into the same room as the man who violated you. But if you can do this, if you're strong enough, we end this faster. Strong enough. Like strength was something I possessed instead of something I'd been faking for 2 years. But then I thought about the cameras. The surveillance photos. The knife through my picture. Ryan had taken my privacy, my safety, my ability to trust. And now he was taking my future too. Somewhere between fear and fury, I made a decision. What do you need me to do? Dante's expression shifted, respect mixing with concern. Just be yourself, scared, alone, reaching out because you need help. That night, my phone buzzed. A text from Ryan's number I'd blocked months ago but apparently hadn't deleted from my iCloud backup. Liv, I know you're scared. I know you're with Morelli. Meet me tomorrow. Our old place. 2 p.m. Come alone. We can fix this. Below it, a video thumbnail. My finger hovered over it, shaking. Dante's hand covered mine. You don't have to watch it, but I did. I needed to see what Ryan was using against me. The video was security footage from my old apartment, the one I'd shared with him. Grainy, date stamped from 18 months ago. Me sleeping, unaware. And Ryan. I stopped the video, closed my eyes, felt something inside me crack open and then harden. He recorded everything, I whispered. Everything he did when I was asleep. When I'd taken medication for my migraines. When I couldn't consent. The silence in the room was absolute. When I opened my eyes, Dante's expression was stone. His voice, when it came, was deadly quiet. He just made his last mistake. Dante didn't ask if I wanted revenge. He simply made calls, his voice low and controlled, activating resources I couldn't see but felt moving beneath the surface like tectonic plates shifting. Within 2 hours, he'd located the server where Ryan stored his videos, identified who had copies, traced the money Ryan owed back through 3 shell companies to the Castellano family's gambling operations. But watching him work was like witnessing a man shed his skin, the careful landlord, the concerned protector, all of it falling away to reveal someone colder, more dangerous. Someone who understood violence not as chaos but as language. and spoke it fluently. "This is who I am," he said when he caught me staring from the doorway of his office. Papers spread across his desk like battle plans. "This is the world I offered to protect you from." I thought about Sophia, about the photograph he carried, about how many times he'd made calls like these, moved pieces on boards I couldn't see, decided who deserved mercy and who deserved ruin. "I'm not afraid of you," I said. His eyes met mine. "Maybe you should be, but I wasn't. I was afraid of myself, of how much I wanted him to make Ryan hurt the way I'd been hurt. How easy it would be to let Dante become my weapon, my vengeance, my absolution from the guilt of having loved someone so wrong. Marco brought Ryan in that evening. Not injured, just terrified, flanked by two men who moved like violence waiting for permission. Ryan's eyes found mine across Dante's living room, and I saw him calculate, saw him try to summon the charm that had once worked on me. Live. Thank God. These men, they're lying about me. I would never sit. Dante's voice cut through the pleading like a blade. Ryan sat. Dante didn't raise his voice once. He simply laid out the evidence like a prosecutor who'd already won: the bank statements, the photographs with Marco Castellano, the metadata from the videos. Each piece of paper placed deliberately on the coffee table between us. "You used her," Dante said, each word precise as surgery. "You violated her. You sold information about her routines, her vulnerabilities, her fears to men who planned to hurt her. And then," his pause carried more weight than shouting ever could, "you documented your crimes and used them as leverage." Ryan's face had gone pale. "I didn't have a choice. I owed money. They said they'd kill me. So you gave them her instead." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I watched Ryan, really looked at him for the first time in 2 years without the filter of shame or self-blame. Saw him for what he was. Not a monster, just a coward. Someone who'd chosen his comfort over my safety, his survival over my humanity, again and again and again. Dante gave him options: cooperate completely, provide testimony that would dismantle the Castellano blackmail operation, name every person involved, hand over every file. In exchange, witness protection. A new name. A chance to disappear, or refuse. Face federal charges for illegal surveillance, extortion, conspiracy, charges Dante's lawyers had already prepared, documented, ready to file. "You have 60 seconds, Dante said. Ryan chose survival. Of course he did. But as I watched him sign papers, watched Marco lead him away to some safe house where he'd wait to testify, I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction. Understanding. Dante had given me justice. But justice felt hollow when it came from someone else's hands. After they left, Dante poured himself scotch and stood at the windows overlooking the city. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man who'd just crossed lines he couldn't uncross. "You're wondering if I'm any different than him," he said without turning around. "No." I moved to stand beside him. "I'm wondering if getting what I wanted makes me like you." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw exhaustion beneath the control. "What do you want, Olivia?" "I want to stop being afraid. I want to stop feeling like I'm always one step away from being someone's victim." My voice steadied. "I want to believe that trusting someone won't destroy me. I can't promise that." "I know." We stood there in silence, the city glittering below us like stars that had fallen and forgotten how to rise. The knock came an hour later. Federal agents, not here to thank us, but to question. Their lead detective, sharp-eyed and skeptical, spread new evidence across Dante's dining table. Financial records, offshore accounts, a photograph from 6 years ago that I couldn't quite make out. "Mr. Morelli," Detective Torres said, her voice carrying authority that didn't bend, "we believe you've been using Miss Reeves to establish an alibi. We need her statement. The truth, not the story you've constructed." She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You're the only witness who can confirm where he was during several incidents we're investigating. And we need to know." She paused. "If you're here because you want to be, or because you're too afraid to leave." I didn't answer Detective Torres immediately. Instead, I asked for time. 24 hours to think, to process, to decide if the man who'd protected me was also the man who'd used me as cover for crimes I didn't want to imagine. Dante didn't stop me from leaving. He simply said, Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. And his eyes held something I couldn't name. Not manipulation. Resignation, maybe. Like he'd always known this moment would come, when I'd have to choose between the version of him I wanted to believe in and the version the world kept insisting was real. Detective Torres drove me to a hotel in Midtown, neutral territory, a room with beige walls and generic art and a door that locked from the inside, small freedoms that felt monumental after days of protection that had begun to feel like captivity. She left me with files, evidence, timelines that placed Dante at crime scenes, or near them, or connected to people who'd ended up dead. But as I read through the night, something became clear. The case against him was built on circumstantial connections and testimony from unreliable witnesses, including Ryan, whose statement they'd clearly leveraged before I'd even known he was involved. The financial records looked damning until I noticed the dates, transactions that occurred during times I could verify Dante had been elsewhere. With me, actually, fixing my leak, bringing me pastries, standing guard outside my window in his SUV. They were using me to fill gaps in their timeline, to create a narrative that made Dante into the villain they needed him to be. But that didn't mean he was innocent. I called the number on Dante's card. Not to talk to him, to talk to Marco, who answered on the second ring. "I need to see something," I said. "Dante's office. The files he didn't show me." Marco was silent for a long moment. Then, "He'll kill me for this." "Then don't tell him." An hour later, I was back at the warehouse, standing in Dante's office while Marco kept watch. The files were organized with obsessive precision. Names, dates, transactions. But there was another folder, hidden beneath false bottom in his desk drawer. Inside, correspondence between Dante and FBI consultants, dates going back 2 years. Subject lines like Castellano family operations and witness protection protocols and intelligence sharing agreement. He wasn't the target, he was the informant. My hands shook as I photographed pages with my phone, piecing together the truth Torres hadn't told me. Dante had been working with federal prosecutors, providing intelligence on organized crime in exchange for immunity. The money laundering charges were part of his cover. The connections to criminals were documented, authorized, part of a larger operation to dismantle the Castellano family from the inside. Ryan's involvement had been the complication, a civilian connection that threatened to expose everything. "He couldn't tell you," Marco said from the doorway. He'd been watching me read, his expression unreadable. "If you'd known, if you'd acted differently around the wrong people, it could have blown his cover. People would have died. So I was bait, for both sides. You were collateral he tried to protect. There's a difference." Marco moved closer, his voice dropping. "Torres knows about the operation. She's testing you, seeing if you'll break, if you'll expose him, if you're a liability or an asset. Why tell me this?" "Because he won't. Because he'd rather you think he's the monster than put you in danger by making you complicit." Marco's jaw tightened. "And because you deserve to make this choice with all the information, not just the version that keeps you safe." I looked at the files spread across Dante's desk. Evidence of a man who'd spent years pretending to be the thing he was fighting against. Who'd let people believe the worst about him because the truth was more dangerous than the lie. What happens if I tell Torres what I found? The operation ends. Months of work disappears. The Castellanos win. And Dante, Marco stopped. He'll be exposed as an informant. They'll kill everyone he's ever protected. Starting with you. The weight of it settled in my chest like lead. I left the warehouse as dawn broke over Red Hook. The files burned into my memory, and went back to the hotel where Detective Torres was waiting with coffee and expectation. "Have you made your decision, Miss Reeves?" I thought about Ryan's video, about the knife through my photograph, about Dante's sister Sophia, who'd died because loving him made her a target, about all the ways protection and control and love tangled together until you couldn't tell which was which. I thought about the man who'd fixed my leak and carried a photograph of a dead sister and made calls that ended lives while somehow, impossibly, making me feel seen for the first time in years. I said. I didn't step away from Dante. I stepped toward Detective Torres, and I told her a truth, just not the one she expected. "I need you to understand something," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm a high school English teacher. 2 months ago, My biggest concern was whether my students would actually read The Great Gatsby or just watch the movie. I didn't know anything about organized crime or federal investigations or men who live double lives. Torres's expression remained neutral, professional. Waiting. But I know about being used. I know what it feels like when someone manipulates your reality, makes you question your own judgment, strips away your autonomy piece by piece until you don't recognize yourself anymore. I thought about Ryan, about the cameras, about all the ways I'd learned to make myself smaller. And that's not what happened here. I told her about the timeline, how Dante had been watching my building long before the threats escalated, how he'd documented concerns about my safety in reports I'd found, reports that predated our first meeting, how every action he'd taken had a paper trail that proved protection, not manipulation. He could have told me who he was, I said, could have explained the federal operation, brought me into his confidence. But he didn't, because doing that would have made me complicit, would have put me in more danger, not less. I met her eyes. He kept me ignorant to keep me safe. And yes, maybe that was controlling. Maybe it was paternalistic. But it wasn't exploitation. Torres studied me for a long moment. Then she closed her notebook with a decisive snap. The operation is compromised anyway, she said, and there was weariness in her voice I hadn't heard before. Ryan Castellano, yes, he's related, a cousin we didn't know about, panicked last night, made calls he shouldn't have. The family knows someone's been feeding us information. She stood, gathering her files. Mr. Morelli's cover is blown, which means this whole thing ends now, one way or another. My stomach dropped. What does that mean for him? It means he needs to disappear for a while. Witness protection? Probably. New identity? The usual. Torres paused at the door. It also means you're free to go, Miss Reeves. The threat against you will be neutralized within 48 hours. We've got enough to move on the Castellanos without needing Morelli's testimony. So he did all this for nothing? No. He bought time, kept people alive who would have died. Including you? Something almost like respect crossed her face. He's not a good man, Miss Reeves, but he's not the monster we needed him to be either. He's just complicated. After she left, I sat in that beige hotel room and thought about complications. About how we're all just trying to survive the narratives we've been handed, rewriting them when we can, living with them when we can't. I thought about Dante choosing to be the villain if it meant keeping his sister's memory sacred. About how he'd looked at me that first night, like I was a problem to solve, yes, but also like I mattered. I thought about what Detective Torres hadn't said, that I could walk away now, go back to my studio, my students, my small safe life. Pretend these weeks had been a fever dream, a story I'd tell myself late at night when the radiator clanged and I wondered what if, or I could choose something else. I found him 3 days later at the warehouse, empty now, stripped of its command center infrastructure, just a building waiting for its next purpose. He was standing in the space where the conference table had been, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing. They told me you'd gone, he said without turning around. I did. I went back to my apartment, graded 63 essays on symbolism, taught 4 classes, pretended everything was normal. But normal felt wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes. I moved closer, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Torres told me you're leaving. New identity, witness protection. It's safer for everyone. For me, you mean... He finally turned. The exhaustion in his face was profound, not just physical, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting so long he'd forgotten what peace felt like. Yes, he said simply. For you. I thought about all the ways men had made decisions for me, claiming it was protection when really it was control. But standing there, looking at Dante, I understood the difference. Control demanded obedience. Protection offered choice. I'm not asking for protection anymore, I told him. Surprise flickered across his face. Then what are you asking for? Partnership. Honesty. And maybe, if you're willing to risk it, something real. The words came easier than I expected. You spent 2 years pretending to be someone you're not. I spent 2 years learning to trust my own judgment again. Maybe we're both tired of performing. Olivia. My name sounded different in his mouth now. Less like possession, more like prayer. My life isn't safe. Even with the Castellanos gone, there will always be someone else. Another threat. Another reason you'd be better off. Without you, I closed the distance between us. Maybe, probably, but I've done safe. I've done invisible. I've done all the things you're supposed to do to protect yourself, and it didn't work. Ryan still found me. The Castellanos still targeted me. Fear still controlled me. So what changed? You asked me once what I wanted. I want to stop being afraid. Not because the threats are gone, but because I'm strong enough to face them. I reached for his hand. Scarred, familiar, steady. With someone who sees me. Who trusts me enough to tell the truth. Even when the truth is dangerous. Dante's fingers closed around mine. I'm not going into witness protection. I know. Torres thinks I'm an idiot for staying. Says the Castellanos have long memories. Probably true. And being with me means your life will never be completely safe. There will always be shadows. Always risks. I'm a teacher in New York City, I said. My life was never completely safe anyway. At least this way, I get to choose my risks. Something in his expression softened, the armor finally cracking enough to let me see beneath. Not the fixer or the informant or the dangerous man. Just Dante. Complicated and flawed and trying. Sophia would have liked you, he said quietly. She always said the bravest thing we can do is choose to trust again after we've been hurt. Smart woman. She was. His thumb traced circles on my palm. I don't know how to do this. Relationships without strategy, love without leverage, just being with someone because they matter. Then we'll figure it out together. He kissed me then, not with the urgency of desperation, but with something deeper. Promise. The acknowledgement that we were both walking into uncertainty, but at least we weren't walking alone. 3 months later, I stood in a different apartment, one with better locks and windows that didn't face the street, but still in Brooklyn because some things about my life were non-negotiable. Dante was teaching me Italian while I graded papers. Marco stopped by with pastries and complaints about his girlfriend. Detective Torres sent occasional emails marked FYI, with updates on cases I probably shouldn't know about, but somehow always involved people we both cared about keeping safe. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined at 22, when I thought love meant someone rescuing you from your own life. It was better. Messier. Real. One evening, Dante found me on the fire escape, my new bookshelf, reading in the last light of day. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. I thought about the leak that had brought him to my door. About all the ways chaos and chance and choice had intersected to create this moment. About how sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is let ourselves be seen. "I'm thinking," I said, "that I called maintenance about a leak and got something I didn't know I needed." He smiled, the same smile from that first night. But now I understood what it meant. Not a warning, not a promise, an invitation to write a different story. Together. If you made it to the end of this story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. And click the yellow bell to subscribe to the channel and support us. Keep the adventure going by clicking on the suggested video on your screen.